Well, the fast fashion industry has been heavily criticised, largely because cheap clothes are quickly thrown away and typically go to landfill, and because their production may have involved poor working conditions or even slavery. New research suggests that the British government has promoted few policies to tackle the issue, and the effectiveness of those few policies has been very limited. One of the researchers is well known to listeners to this programme. She is Dolly Theis, who is completing a PhD at the MRC Epidemiology Unit at Cambridge University. She joins me now. Welcome back to the programme.
Good evening, Michael. Pleasure to be here.
And I'm also joined by Trewin Restorick. He is the Chief Executive Officer of Hubbub, who commissioned the research. Welcome to Times Radio, Trewin.
Good evening, Michael. Nice to be here. Thank you.
Dolly Theis, first of all. What are the principal harms from very inexpensive throwaway fashion?
So the three kind of major problems with the fast fashion industry is largely around the unsustainable materials that are used in the clothes that they make, and then the sheer quantity that is produced. Just to give you a recent example, a brilliant piece by John Gapper in the FT exposed Shane, one of the major fast fashion companies globally, produces almost 5,000 daily new items. So too much for us to be able to even purchase, let alone, which is why it all ends up on a landfill site. And then finally, the unethical supply chains. So there's a kind of environment aspect to this, and there's also a modern slavery, human rights abuses aspect to this issue. And it's so important to not overlook either of those.
So I want to pin you down on that, Dolly. Is it modern slavery or is it poor work practices?
Interesting. It depends where you look around the world, and there have been lots of exposés recently, which people I'm sure will be familiar with some of the boohoo scandal that was exposed in Leicester. Poor working conditions, you name it. And then you can go and look at it on a global scale, and you've got very real situations in terms of modern slavery. And we've been discussing this today, in fact, but the relations with the Uyghur crisis over in China. And there was a recent Bayes Committee report led brilliantly by Nusrat Ghani MP on the modern slavery element. And yet this is something that has been totally overlooked, or whether it's overlooked, ignored, we don't know, but by government so far, and absolutely needs to be at the centre of the government's response to this issue.
Trewin Restorick, you're Chief Executive Officer of Hubbub, and you commissioned the research. What is Hubbub?
So Hubbub's an environment charity. I set it up 7 years ago as a sort of belated midlife crisis. But basically our aim is to encourage people to take very practical and positive steps in their daily lives to reduce their impact on the environment, but also to hopefully help them live healthier lives and save money along the way. And fashion is one of the four subjects we look at. So we also look at cutting food waste, reducing plastic pollution, and sort of helping people heat their homes more efficiently. But fashion is definitely one of the four that we've been seeking to tackle since the charity was set up 7 years ago.
Forgive the tone of this question, but when a charity, a pressure group commissions research, one has the feeling that it does so because it kind of knows what the answer is going to be. Should one put a lot of trust in research that's commissioned by a body that has a very clear position on an issue?
Well, we do have a clear position, and we commissioned Dolly, who I believe you know quite well, who takes a very academic and thorough approach to this. So I think we wholeheartedly trusted her to do the research, and we didn't say, here's the answer, go and prove it. But the reason we commissioned it is that fast fashion, the fashion industry is wonderful, it's creative, it's fantastic on one side, but on the other side, it's sort of got a bigger, darker impact. So we know, for example, that the fashion industry creates more carbon than flying and shipping combined. It creates huge amounts of waste. Half the clothes you buy contain plastic. and clothing is one of the biggest contributors to microfiber plastic pollution in our oceans. So there is a lot of things that the industry needs to address, and you can either ask businesses to do it voluntarily, and some are definitely taking very positive steps. But occasionally they need a nudge and a bit of encouragement, and the rules of the game need to change by government. And we have known over 7 years that the government has been slightly reticent, despite many green claims, to put policies in place that can level up the playing field and make sure that those companies that are doing good things don't get punished, and that others don't get a bit of a free ride. So that's why we commissioned the report. So yeah, we were pretty sure what the answer was going to be, but we didn't do the research ourselves. It was independently commissioned, and I think we were quite surprised by how stark the results that Dolly found were.
And Trewin, we've been talking about fast fashion. If some of our listeners are concerned and want to do their bit, is it clear where fast fashion begins and ends? I mean, if a woman buys a Chanel suit and if I go to Savile Row, does that mean I'm safe or not?
Well, I'm sure you do go to Savile Row, Michael. So, I mean, what's happened in the fashion industry is a number of things. So, sort of not that many years ago, you had seasons of fashion. So, the major brands would put out a sort of different seasons about 3 or 4 times a year. And now they've disappeared. And so, as Dolly mentioned, companies are producing lots and lots and lots of different clothing. So you see it on Love Island and you can buy it the next day. I'm not sure if that's what you do, but that's what's happening generally. And we're also seeing that we did some research recently that found 1 in 6 young people, once they've worn an outfit and it's shown on social media, they don't feel comfortable wearing that outfit again. So they're buying lots and lots of clothing. More and more people are buying clothing online. So, they're not going into the shops to try something on and then see which one they like, but they're perhaps buying 3 or 4 items, trying them on at home and then returning the others, which has a big environmental impact. And then we're also seeing a huge growth in sort of buy now, pay later, so Klarna type things. 90% of those purchases are on fashion and footwear. And it's encouraging particularly sort of young women to buy a lot of clothing which perhaps they can't afford because they don't have to pay for it later. So what fast fashion is a bringing together of all of those things, which is that we're buying more clothing more rapidly. We're not wearing it for so long. Something we don't even wear at all. It's a lot cheaper, so it disintegrates quicker. So that's what fast fashion is. So, if you want to move away from fast fashion, you're obviously buying clothes that will last longer. You're caring for them better. You're perhaps washing them less often. You're buying clothes which are made of more high quality materials. So you might be paying slightly more for that clothing in the first instance, but it should be something that has longevity.
I'm talking to Trewin Restorick and Dolly Theis about fast fashion. We're going to take a trail in just a moment, and then we're going to go back and talk to them again about what the research has revealed. This is Michael Portillo on Times Radio in association with visitmalta.com from... I'm talking to Dolly Theis, an academic researcher, and to Trewin Restorick from the charity Hubbub about fast fashion. Dolly Theis, so you have just done some research on government policies, and just before we get to what you've found, can it be effective at all to have national policies? This problem we've been talking about clearly is absolutely international. Should we not be looking rather to international conventions rather than to national legislation?
Such a good question, and there are so many layers to this issue. So I wouldn't say that you take one of the 2 approaches, but rather you've got to look at all of it together. And actually that raises a very, very interesting point, which is happening right now. The decision's happening right now around the trade relationship and the trade agreement with China. And, the products, what impact that means on the products that we purchase from international countries and what is rooted in those trade agreements and those kind of priorities. Do we want to prioritize ethical supply chains, the environment over a more short-term win in terms of a trade agreement in which, whatever it is that's deemed a positive out of it. And these are the kind of policy decisions that government is faced with on that international scale, which are really critical to this issue. And then when it comes down to the domestic side, there are absolutely conditions that you can create, which we are going to absolutely be exploring on how to tackle this issue, that are about the kind of domestic situation that we have more control over. So whether that's how companies operate, what kind of materials can be used in factories that exist within this country, you name it, there are lots of national level policy interventions.
And you looked at the national policy interventions that have been made in the UK. What did you discover?
So it was fascinating. I should give some background to this research, that this was really inspired by a piece of analysis that I conducted that we have spoken about on the history of obesity policies in England. And that revealed that the government has published 689 obesity policies in the last 30 years. And what we wanted to see was, in comparison, how many policies and what kind of policies has the government published on fast fashion in terms of tackling the issue. And compared to 689 obesity policies in England, there have been 19 policies on fast fashion since 2007. So it's such a stark comparison to major issues that the UK government faces, and yet such disproportionate attention or focus in terms of government policies proposed on the issue. So that really was quite a stark finding. And on top of that, fashion as a policy area sits within the responsibility of DCMS, the Department of Culture, Media and Sport. And yet all 19 policies proposed by government to date have been proposed by DEFRA, by the department that's responsible for the environment. And that's because they have largely been looking at fast fashion as a waste-based issue. And so there are kind of many layers under this research, which are really fascinating to explore about, what part of government should be ultimately responsible for fast fashion, given that it's not only an environmental problem, it's also a supply chain issue. So there haven't been any policies proposed on that supply chain issue, as I said earlier. And yet on top of that, the way that the policies were proposed also means that they were very unlikely to be implemented. So there are many problems, but there are some nuggets of hope in the select committee reports coming out. So the BAES one I mentioned, and the Environment Audit Committee also published a report with some brilliant recommendations, but unfortunately those have all been rejected by government. So we've got great ideas out there in existence on how to tackle this. We just need to clearly get to the point where government recognises the importance of tackling this issue and actually starting to move that policy implementation forward.
But Dolly Theis, when it comes to government policies, I'm not impressed by quantity. I'm only impressed by quality. And more to the point, I know that's your point of view as well, because your research on child obesity and this enormous number of policies, what you found is that on the whole, the policies have been ineffective because they didn't have an implementation strategy and they weren't measured for their effectiveness. So why now do you come with this line of argument that you can see the government's not doing very much because it has very few policies on fast fashion? If it had one policy on fast fashion that was effective, that was implemented and was monitored, that might be better than 689, mightn't it?
Absolutely. There's no comparison. There's no saying that there should just be more policies proposed. This is an even worse situation where you could say worse situation, but you don't even have the level of policies proposed. You've only got 19. And of those 19, you're seeing exactly the same patterns. So very proposed in a way that's very unlikely to lead to their implementation. Only one of the policies had any cost or budget, for example, proposed with it. And only 32% of the policies, of those 19 policies, actually sought to directly tackle the issue rather than just raise awareness about the issue or to sort of learn more about it. So within those 19, you not only have exactly the same thing that you're talking about, which is that they're unlikely to be implemented, but you also don't have the good quality content that will likely tackle the issue as well. So exactly the same problems, you're just only dealing with 19 versus 689 of them.
Trewin Restorick, you've seen this research. Obviously, the conclusions are very disappointing as far as you're concerned. I mean, really, what is it that you would like to see? What do you think might be effective policies that could be implemented at a national level?
Well, I think government's sort of slightly missing a trick here because, the UK has traditionally had a very, very strong textile industry in many of those northern towns and cities that are massively part of the levelling up agenda. And what we would like to see is, instead of what's happening at the moment, which is we're creating masses of waste, much of which is exported out of this country. What we'd like to see is an investment in technology to sort of be able to turn the clothing that we're throwing away to reuse and remanufacture the fabrics within the UK, which we think environmentally is obviously beneficial, but also means that you sort of have a more circular economy within the UK. And we think that if you invest in that sort of technology, you could then use the expertise that still actually sits within so many of those sort of northern towns and cities around Huddersfield and places like that to create jobs that enable people to repurpose the fabric and sell it back within the UK. So we think there's a massive opportunity to change the dynamics of the industry and have a more circular industry that boosts our economy, creates new jobs, and reduces environmental waste. And I think it's an area where, if the government did take a sort of more broader view and didn't just treat it solely as a sort of DEFRA issue, that they could have something which has quite a lot of benefits economically, financially and socially. So that's the sort of imaginative thinking we'd like to see from government.
But it's interesting, Trewin, that having commissioned this research, which reveals the policy is ineffective, that your answer to me was not that you wanted different legislation that would be effectively implemented and monitored, but rather that you thought there should be an investment strategy. So does that mean that there's no problem with the government only having 19 policies, because what's actually needed is just one investment policy?
Well, it is an investment policy, but there is a bit of a carrot and stick as well. So one of the recommendations from the Environmental Audit Committee was that there should be, a bit like we've got a charge on plastic carrier bags, and that's used to shift consumer sort of consumption away from those plastic carrier bags, that there could be something similar on sort of plastic related or fast fashion clothing, so that there's a bit of an economic nudge to get away from this incredibly cheap clothing and use the money that's created through that charge to support that investment policy. So we think that it's not just about investment, but it's actually about changing the sort of economic model within which the industry works at the moment to make sure that fast throwaway industry that we have at the moment isn't the most economically sort of viable of the routes they could choose.
Dolly Theis, a personal question. What is your policy for dressing? If I may say so, you are always extraordinarily well turned out, very, very elegantly. But it must be the case then that you're not buying those clothes new. Am I right?
You are correct, and that's very kind. I started buying secondhand. I have to say thanks to Baroness and Jenkin for getting me into charity shopping in the way that I am absolutely obsessed with it now, and trying to convert as many people as possible. And if lots of people don't seem to know that Oxfam has an online store which has tens of thousands of items, which also reveals just how much quantity is produced, clearly too much even for Oxfam to sell. But yes, I shop strictly secondhand in charity shops and vintage and borrow and rent and anything that I can to not have to buy anything new. And there's so much out there. I really do hope that people can get on board. And we have there's a month a year, Secondhand September, in which this is really promoted, but we hope to make it secondhand whole year if possible. And that's really what our research is designed to inspire.
And I'm sure this would vary from item to item, but presumably it's your policy to buy secondhand and then to send the clothes on again that someone else can buy them again. Is that true?
Exactly. And my dream was always to host events, which I'm hoping to do once we really can, more freely, but where people write this sort of best memory that they have in a given item. And so that storytelling, and to think of clothes as holding that, because I think Trewin made such a brilliant point earlier, which is, this isn't saying that the fashion industry is bad. The fashion industry is wonderful, and our association and experience with clothing and identity and dressing up and whatever it is so vital. And I really hope that this research, we're identifying the very few negative aspects and really just seeing how we can tackle those, but not throwing the kind of baby out with the bathwater.
And let me press you a little further. So if you get into this habit of buying second-hand clothes, do you have to be someone who's very handy? I mean, do you have to remake the clothes? Do you have to restyle them yourselves? So is it something that anyone could do, or does it really need someone who's got a bit of skill?
Absolutely anyone can do, and it depends how much you want to get creative. I very rarely have to be fiddling with things or getting things tailored or whatever, but you absolutely can do whatever you want with it. And I think people are often shocked, and I have to say it's a bit of, you've got to throw yourself into it and just enjoy the looking around for stuff, which really is the sort of fun of it, and try things on and buy things that you wouldn't necessarily, because luckily things are cheaper and you can afford to be more adventurous. Not that someone like you with a fantastic style, may I say, also needs any encouragement in that. You're brilliant at it anyway. But anyone listening, I really hope that you can play and have fun with it while embracing something that is good for the planet as well.
Well, I'm ashamed to say that I buy my stuff new. I can say that it's not fast fashion. It seems to take my tailor quite a long time to produce the goods that I want. So, Dolly, just sticking with you, you've given an example of what people can do. And if people followed your example, that would clearly make an enormous difference. But your research has been about government policy. What is it that you think is missing? What is an achievable target for the government? What could they implement in short measure?
Well, we can point to their most recent strategy, published in 2018, Our Waste, Our Resources, a strategy for England. And it would just be fantastic, as I've said to you before about the obesity policies, if the government can do one thing, it can just implement the most recent strategy that it has got going. And by monitoring and evaluating the policies and tweaking where necessary, we can move towards progressing on tackling these issues meaningfully. And there are, as I said, lots of brilliant other reports, the Bayer Select Committee report, the Environment Audit Committee report. There are tons of policies that could be implemented in that. So if we can just get going with those and monitor, tweak and evaluate, that would be one step further towards tackling this issue in a meaningful way.
And Trewin Restorick of Hubbub, what do you think you've learned from this research?
I think we've learned that there is a stunning lack of leadership at the moment from government. When we talk to industry, we know that there are many sections of industry that want to move. And I think if the government sort of said, this is the direction we need to go in, I think they might be surprised about how much of the industry will follow them, because, they know that deep down that the sector is slightly broken and it can't carry on with its existing model.
Very good. Well, thank you very much. That's Dolly Theis, a researcher from Cambridge University, and Trewin Restorick, who's the Chief Executive of Hubbub, a charity, and we've been talking about fast fashion. And thank you both for being with me this evening. The other side of the news,